Australian rules football in Ireland. Australian rules football in Ireland began in 1999 when clubs were simultaneously formed in Dublin and Belfast. However, awareness of the sport dates back to the first tours by Australian teams in late 1967, and the country subsequently became a source of players for professional leagues in Australia. While coexisting with and relying heavily on players from Gaelic games, the sport has grown and Ireland has become one of the most decorated nations in Australian rules in both men's and women's competition. History. One could argue that the Irish have been playing Australian rules as early as the 1870s, as recent evidence suggests that a form of football being played in southwestern Ireland at the time was played under Victorian rules in a fashion indistinguishable from that of the game played in Australia, and early on it was even played with a rugby ball, with a mark for catching the ball, and it is not known how or when the Victorian rules were introduced to Ireland. However, its legacy can be found in the written rules of the Commercials Club of County Limerick from the early 1880s, which later, along with elements of soccer, formed the basis for Gaelic football. Primarily Irish historians analysing accounts of the traditional Irish football cade and Gaelic Athletic Association codified rules against the Melbourne Football Club rules of 1959 and Victorian rules of 80. Like Australian football, this was in an effort to differentiate from rugby and was primarily based on the Victorian rules of 1866 and 1877. For example, early codified Gaelic called for Australian rules style behind posts not present in cade. Early Victorian rules was played with also a round ball until the introduction of the Sherin in the 1880s. Other than the directly copied rules, analysts argue that so many of the rules are so similar to the Victorian rules that the GAA must have obtained a deep knowledge of these laws. In any case, the Irish game has been gradually evolving closer to the Australian game since, and as recently as 2017, with the GAA introduced the mark from Australian football, one of the game's other distinctive, to encourage more spectacular aerial contests. It was this similarity that eventually raised the awareness in Ireland of the Australian sport. Certainly this awareness has grown substantially since the first international rules football tests took place in late 1967. However, Aussie rules was not officially played in Ireland until clubs were simultaneously formed in Dublin and Belfast in 1999. Australian Football World Tour. In 1967, Harry Batesall drew inspiration from watching the 1966 All-Ireland Senior Football Championship final on television and formed an Australian side, nicknamed the Gallas, to play the game against an Irish side. The next year, he organised the Australian Football World Tour, a 6-match series with games played against Irish teams in Ireland, the United Kingdom, and United States of America. What followed was the beginning of regular interaction between the two codes, which was to become the hybrid code of international rules football played in both countries and facilitating the cross-code competition. Irish experiment. Ron Barassi, drawing comparisons between Australian rules football and Gaelic football, was of the opinion that Gaelic footballers could provide a previously untapped pool of potential Australian rules players. As a result, wealthy Victorian clubs were scouting Ireland for new talent. In 1982, Barassi, then the Melbourne VFL club coach, and his recruiting team, including Melbourne's Barry Richardson, travelled to Ireland looking for young, tall, and talented players. Over the following years, a number of Irish athletes made the journey to Australia to play professionally in Australia. Players were found not only from Gaelic football codes, but other sports including hurling and rugby. Some, including Jim Stynes, Tad Kennelly, and Martin Clark, achieved a level of fame in Ireland, either going on to careers in Australia or returning home to achieve success in their sports at home, and along with the International Rules series, increase the profile and awareness of the Australian game. Formation of the Arfley and national team. Two clubs in Dublin and Belfast. recruited and trained through the winter of 1999, and played a number of British Aussie Rules clubs in challenge matches in early spring 2000. The Australian Rules Football League of Ireland (ARFLI) was formed in October 2000 after the first ever Irish Grand Final was contested between them. The following year, players from the clubs were drawn to form the first national team. Growth and expansion. In the 2010s, the women's game grew rapidly, and the first national team was established, and players began to make their way to women's leagues in Australia. By 2014, the league had grown to more than 200 players and expanded to 6 men's clubs and 3 women's clubs. National teams. An Irish national Aussie Rules team, drawn from all ARFLI-affiliated clubs, a final panel of 24 players, whittled down from 60 over a 3-month training period, made the trip. Ireland, playing their first ever competitive international matches, won all their games in the round-robin series, and went on to record a win against Denmark, pre-tournament favourites, in the grand final. This was a huge achievement for such a young league against teams from leagues that had been established for 10 years plus. Darren Fitzpatrick of Kilkenny, who previously played Aussie Rules at a professional level with the Western Bulldogs in Australia, coached the team. In August 2002, the national team attended the Australian Football International Cup and Amateur World Cup for nations outside of Australia. The team went into the competition as third seeds behind Papua New Guinea and New Zealand. The competition was a success for Ireland as they beat Canada, Samoa, USA, South Africa, and New Zealand in the group stage, and went on to beat PNG in a televised final at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. The team, which was again coached by Darren Fitzpatrick and was captained by Michael Johnston. In 2005, the Green Machine again attended the Australian Football International Cup. With injuries and late withdrawals, the team managed a 4th place behind New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and USA. Jim Stein's brother David coached the 2014 national side, hoping to defend the title. However, the side failed to defeat Papua New Guinea in the final. The men's side was considered favourites going into the 2017 International Cup, thought they finished in 3rd place. Governing body and participation. The governing body is the Australian Rules Football League of Ireland (ARFLI). As of 2014, there were more than 200 senior players and in 6 men's clubs and 3 women's clubs. Media coverage. The sport and international rules has been covered in the media for many years, though it was only in 2010 that there has been regular AFL coverage on television through TG4. And also in the media, including the International Rules series. In 2021, the AFLO began showing on TG4. Current issues. The sport in Ireland faces constant struggle due to the massive popularity of the indigenous and similar sport of Gaelic football, which discourages professionalism. A controversial international rules series in 2005 may have irreparably damaged the reputation of the code in Ireland. However, the continued export of Gaelic football converts to Aussie rules ensures that the sport continues to have a small following in Ireland. Proximity to Great Britain and mainland Europe, where there are fairly strong Aussie rules leagues, gives teams from Ireland the opportunity to regularly participate in international competition and remain competitive through access to Gaelic football players. Notable players. Australia has recruited several Irish Gaelic footballers to play Aussie rules. As Gaelic football is primarily amateur competition and the AFL competition is professional, there is a strong financial lure. Converts have included Jim Steins, Sean White, Tad Kennelly, and Satanta O.H. Ailpin Hurler. Leagues. Australian Rules Football League of Ireland,